Today is Thursday, July 23rd, 2015. I'm Susan Meehan, and I am interviewing John Heinze today, owner of the Allenberry Resort in Boiling Springs and a lifelong resident of Cumberland County, more or less. We are in the recording studio of the Cumberland County Historical Society. And we have a very fine record of ownership of the Allenberry property, written by John's wife Kathleen and available in the book entitled At a Place Called Boiling Springs. So today we're going to focus on John's particular experiences in growing up and working at such a wonderful spot in Cumberland County. So if you would begin by telling us how you came to Cumberland County.
I came to Cumberland County by way of the Carlisle Hospital, where I was born, and on June 21st, the first day of summer of 1935. I had my uncle was the chief surgeon in the Carlisle Hospital at some point. His name was Charles Schaefer, and he spent his career in Carlisle as a surgeon, and that's how I got here. That's how I arrived as a person. Actually, my father and mother both came from Johnstown, Pennsylvania. My father graduated from Penn State University and got involved in the hospitality business by working for Matty Mateer at the corner room in State College Hotel in State College, and looked for opportunities around the general area, actually, as far as Maryland and Pennsylvania, and even probably further than that, looked for opportunities to get into a business. And he found
food related.
Yeah, hospitality business. Mm-hmm. Yeah, food and lodging. And he found opportunities in Carlisle, and he operated two businesses in Carlisle just prior to the war. One in a building called the Carlisle Inn, which was located where the Church of God home is now by the Carlisle Barracks. At that time, there were two entrances to the Carlisle Barracks, both of them on the Carlisle Pike side, and we were located in the middle. And I can remember as a little boy going down and talking to the armed sentries because it was wartime. And he also operated a restaurant in Carlisle and Hanover Street called the Dairy Store, which was like a delicatessen restaurant, and they sold, my grandfather worked there. He worked in the kitchen and the counter and made ham spread and cheese spread and sold milk and eggs and so forth and so on. It was really like a little delicatessen. People didn't buy their food at gas stations in those days. They actually bought their food from restaurants. He also operated three military catering services, one at Dickinson College.
Those were your father or your grandfather?
My father. My grandfather, he and my grandfather were like partners. He brought his parents from Johnstown to live in Carlisle, and his father worked with him in all aspects, but primarily my grandfather ran the dairy store operation. My dad ran a catering service for Army Air Corps cadets at Dickinson College. He ran the food service at the Mechanicsburg Naval Depot, and he ran a service for a WAF, or what do you call Women's Army?
WAC?
WAC, I guess. Yeah. WAC in Harrisburg. So he had there were three military operations going on at that time. Of course, Mechanicsburg is still the largest inland warehouse operation in the country. So that's a little bit of the background before he had the opportunity to purchase the Allenberry property.
Well, as a boy, then you spent your very first years living at the Carlisle Inn property? Or?
I was born and lived briefly at the Carlisle Inn, although I think we probably had only a single room or two there. So we got a small cottage on Spring Road, where I lived until my sister was born, and then I think that was probably too small, and we moved to a small apartment on Lowther Street over my uncle's doctor's office, and that was very small. So my sister and I never knew having any room at all, and all of a sudden we end up at Allenberry. And like I said, I was interviewed just a few days ago, and I told the lady that my first memory of Allenberry was when I was 14 years old, getting out of the car on the hill and running down to the Yellow Breeches Creek and thinking that was just the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I've never forgotten that experience. And that was my first introduction to Allenberry, and there we were at home in this huge, beautiful limestone farmhouse that we call the Mansion House at Allenberry, and it's kind of the signature building at Allenberry. It sits right on the hill overlooking the Yellow Breeches Creek. It's a beautiful property.
So you began school in Carlisle then?
Yes, I did. I went 3 years to Carlisle. First, second, and third grade, and then matriculated to...
Would that been at Latord or...
But the Franklin building, yeah, where the YMCA is, or the Y is now. And I used to walk. I used to walk all the way from Lowther Street. They talk about children not being out alone. I'll tell you what, I spent a lot of time on the streets alone when I was a little guy. Anyway, we moved to Boiling Springs. I started fourth grade and graduated from Boiling Springs High School because even though Allenberry is located in Monroe Township, so that wasn't really our school district, but that was the only school available until they built Cumberland Valley. And my younger brother, Jerry, went to Cumberland Valley High School. My sister and I graduated from Boiling Springs, which is South Middleton.
And for your elementary, or you were...
The Boiling Springs School at that time was a consolidated grade school, middle school, high school, all together. Yeah.
Now, when you were growing up, your growing up years at Allenberry, were you sort of self-contained in your family as far as friends went, or did you have school friends that you biked to see and that sort of thing? Or
it was different. Living in Boiling Springs was a very different kind of culture than Carlisle, because Carlisle was, of course, a community where you had access to other people through the town and the backyards and neighbors and everything. In a school like Boiling Springs, it's primarily a farm community, and children are somewhat isolated. They didn't have the park systems that they have now, and all the organized recreation and sports and so forth for children like they do today. So my social life, other than at school itself, was really pretty confined to Allenberry, where there was a lot going on. So I wasn't milking cows. I was in kitchens and at the theater and all the aspects of the Allenberry community.
did you have a favorite aspect?
Well, at different times of your life, you're attracted to different things. We moved to Allenberry in 1944, opened for business in 1946, and I would do jobs in the kitchen, washing pots and pans and answering the phone in an old time switchboard where you plug the plugs into the little holes to complete your communication lines. And then in 1949, when we started the theater, two couples came to Allenberry to get started to design and build the sets and get ready to open the theater. And those two couples were Dave and Marge Brubaker and Joe and Marilyn Jennings. There were two couples, and Joe Jennings was the technician, and Marge Brubaker was the set designer. David, of course, is well known in the Carlisle community as an actor, and of course, having taken over the Mermaid Players at Dickinson College and running that program. I think probably starting that program and running it for years and years. He was quite a fixture in the Carlisle community. But he always, on his summer vacation, always performed at Allenberry until he passed away. So those two couples I'll always remember because I spent a lot of time with them. I would just hang out back at the shop. And
is the shop in that same building as the theater, or was it located separately?
The shop was located actually behind the kitchen. It had originally been built, I think, as a shop to facilitate the resort, but it turned into a theater shop for years and years and years until I built a shop finally. And I'm very bad on dates. As a matter of fact, I've already given you the wrong age when I arrived at Allenberry. I wasn't 14. I was 14 when I started to work with the theater. I'd only completed 3 grades, and so I was born in 35. We got there in 44, so I was only 9 years old when I had my first experience with Allenberry and the Creek. So I have to correct that, and I'm going to be off on a lot of dates because we've been there 70 years. And let me tell you, a lot's happened in 70 years. But I did build a shop behind the theater, which really made life easier for everybody. And then after building the shop, a couple years later, we added a player's studio, which was a rehearsal studio. And we added that right onto the shop with a door between the shop and the studio so that they could bring the flats right into the studio and set them up while another show was being performed on stage. And they could set the flats up, and that was the idea, and actually perform on the stage. The studio was designed so that you could mark out the whole stage and actually do all your blocking right in the rehearsal studio. Prior to that, we had used different buildings. We'd used Boiling Springs High School during the summer for rehearsal areas, and it was catch as catch can. But the facilities for the theater at Allenberry today are very, very practical and work very well. So
now, was it your father's concept to bring the theater there, or who's
in the 40? Route 174 that went past Allenberry was hardly larger than a single lane country road. It wasn't, nobody in Carlisle, I don't think, really knew anything about the Allenberry property. It was a very unique property. It was owned by the Sadlers, who one was Judge Horace Sadler and a couple of brothers that were lawyers and one thing or another, I think, in Philadelphia and Harrisburg and Carlisle. And Horace Sadler used to come into the dairy store and got to be very friendly with my grandfather. and he mentioned that they had this beautiful property called Allenberry in Boiling Springs that had been converted. They had taken this dairy barn and converted it into a place for entertaining. He called it Fairfield Hall at Allenberry, and it was an incredible building. He had a guy by the name of Paul Blosser do murals on the walls. They put the walls in on the upper floor and put murals on the walls that depicted scenes at the Allenberry property and some in the buildings and so forth. On the lower level, they, in what would have been the barnyard at one time, they built pens for exotic birds and pheasants and things that they kept in those cages. It was quite a period of time in the 30s and early 40s. The murals were painted in the mid-30s. The map of Cumberland County was painted, which still exists, with Cumberland County Historical Society appreciates a great deal. Mm-hmm. That was painted in 1934, I believe, by Paul Blosser. Anyway, there were kitchen facilities and walk-in refrigerators and that sort of thing on the lower level to support the parties and activities that they had upstairs in the dining areas. And we've maintained that building pretty much as it had been. We had to take one wall out, so we lost a couple of murals to create a larger dining room, which we now call the Crockett Room. The rooms are all named after previous owners of the property. And Crockett was, of course, the Crockett family, two brothers who were uncles of Davy Crockett, owned the two properties, Rose Balcony and Allenberry. Rose Balcony is just the sister farmhouse that the Dixon family have lived in for decades now. And the barn for that farm was part of the Allenberry property, and that was in fact a barn when we came there in 1944. And my father had the idea of buying some sheep, raising sheep, which we did. We had the stalls and everything. We had a horse that and a surrey that he would use to, well, we rode. I had a pony. We used to ride occasionally, not very often, because my dad was a real entrepreneur and a very hard worker, so he didn't have a whole lot of time with the family. But the idea of the horse was to pull a surrey so that you could pull your guests around the property. But that didn't last too long before we converted that barn into a lodge that we call the Stone Lodge, and that is a lodge even today. Originally had 22 rooms in it, but we took the lower rooms out to create the carriage room, a la carte restaurant, and bar. We never had a bar at Allenberry through the early years. It wasn't unusual for resorts, Pennsylvania resorts, not to have liquor service. They didn't have it for years and years in the Poconos. And my grandfather, of course, was a very religious man, very church-going, and so it wasn't until my grandfather passed away, I think in about 1956, that we opened the bar in the carriage room. Opened a very small bar, just took a couple of guest rooms out, opened a small bar. It became so popular that we finally took all the guest rooms out and created the carriage room, dining room, and a larger bar. That was in the late 50s.
Was that unique then in the area to have a restaurant with a bar like that?
Yes, I think it was. There weren't very many places around the area. There was a little bar. There was a little bar at the Boiling Springs Tavern. There was a little bar in the corner, right in the corner of the property at the intersection. And then that became a drugstore, and the bar moved over into where the restaurant, where the bar is today. And that's when that moved over. And Mel, can't remember his last name right now, I can't remember names, took over that. He ran the feed mill and the bar. And it wasn't really much of a restaurant. You could get sandwiches and hamburgers and things like that. It was pretty much a bar. And I can remember going into that bar before it was at that location, when it was over in the corner, right on the intersection. I can remember going in there with our maintenance man, George Ilgenfritz, who we inherited when we bought the business. It wasn't a business. We didn't buy a business. We bought a property that was not a business. But there was a caretaker and his wife, George and Elsie Ilgenfritz, and George became, he had always maintained the property, so he was the maintenance guy. And his wife, Elsie Ilgenfritz, worked in the kitchen. George was, I guess I can say that at this point that he was an alcoholic and spent a lot of time in the bar, and he used to take me in as a young boy, just took me in with him, and I would go in there on Sundays when they would sell liquor illegally and watch baseball games on the TV. So I had a lot of experience in bars before I was big enough to sit in a bar stool practically.
So when you had the bar, and I was just wondering, did that then make the coming to that restaurant more appealing to more local area, or were you drawing from out of the area?
Yeah, when we actually opened the carriage room, there was quite a lot of atmosphere in the carriage room because of the structure of the barn. We still have the stable doors are still part of the building. They've never been taken off their hinges. When we had guest rooms there, they were the doors. They were like storm doors, I guess. They weren't really used. They had actual doors, and they have the numbers, the room numbers of the rooms right above them still exist to this day, even though the carriage room's been in there for I don't know since since the late 50s. There's quite a lot of atmosphere. And I rebuilt, or I added on to the carriage room. I made it a much larger room after my dad passed away in 1972. We opened the larger carriage room with a bigger room where we could have weddings and bigger and more activity. And it's still a very popular, it's a beautiful room. But we don't use it for a la carte dining anymore. All of our food service is located in Fairfield Hall, and we have an a la carte dining area downstairs there that we used to call the carriage room. We used to call it the Players Club. And then the RNG Lounge, after Richard North Gage, who was our founding director, but it's been recently given another name called the Breeches. They thought that members of the family thought that might be more attractive to the public. I don't know. So that's I'm kind of rambling all over.
That's right. Let's go back a little bit to sort of maintain the chronology. When you were a teenager
mm-hmm.
and involved with the property, was this something that you saw yourself doing as in your adult career, or did you want to leave and get out of there, or what happened after graduation?
I was a legacy at Penn State. My dad had worked with Matty Mateer, who became quite a prominent citizen of State College with several businesses and land holdings and apartment buildings and everything else. The two of them worked together to start the hotel school at Penn State. So I was kind of destined to go to the hotel school at Penn State, which I certainly enjoyed. I certainly enjoyed my 4-year career at Penn State. My activity, when I joined a fraternity, my activity was going out. I wasn't much of an athlete, but I enjoyed athletics, and I particularly enjoyed football, of course, and went out for football manager. And that led to a very close relationship with the football community at Penn State. My dad, being a Penn Stater, as a matter of fact, he even catered. He would cater alumni functions at State College in Rec Hall back in the 40s and early 50s, before they had any kind of sophisticated food service to do it themselves. So he enjoyed any opportunity to come to State College. He was always a season ticket holder for football, and so when I went out for football manager, became a football manager for the team, he took that opportunity to meet Rip Engel, who was the head coach at the time, and his young assistant, Joe Paterno, and invited them down to Allenberry in 1954. They came down to Allenberry, the whole coaching staff and their wives, no children, for a weekend after the season, and they came down for about 30 years every year. So our relationship with the coaching staff and the football community was rather unique, and Joe and Sue were very close friends throughout, my father's life and mine. Yeah.
So then, you mentioned a military career. How did that
Yeah,
happen?
well, when you're a freshman at Penn State, back in those days, in the 50s, you had a military obligation, and you had, at Penn State, you had to apply for one of the 3 services: the Navy, the Air Force, or the Army. The Navy was a little more difficult because you had to qualify, and they gave you scholarship, actual scholarship, and a commission when you went into the program at the beginning of the year. So you were dedicated to 4 years. The other 2 services, you only had a requirement of 2 years, but you could apply for advanced ROTC and receive your commission. In the Air Force, of course, you had to qualify for flight training, which meant you had to have 20/20 vision and be in good health and all that sort of thing that you need for flight school. So I applied for Air Force, went through the program, the 4-year program, received my commission, went on to flight school, and spent 5 years and 3 months on active duty in the Air Force as a pilot. So when I got out of the Air Force, I met my wife on a trip around the world from Europe. Took my separation in Europe, traveled around the world, met my wife, who was to become my wife, and returned to Allenberry, and that's kind of a story in itself. Kathy was on her way to Afghanistan to join her father, who was the British ambassador, and we met. And after a year of going back and forth to England and America, I went to visit her in Afghanistan. We decided to get married there. And my father and mother and Maddie and Laura Mateer from State College, and my uncle, who was another uncle that was a doctor in Maryland, and his wife, came on a trip to Afghanistan. And while they were on that trip, it was a round-the-world trip, my father's right-hand man, Ernie Coder, passed away, actually on the job, opening a CCNB branch in Camp Hill. So when Kathy and I finally returned to America, there was a need for a management person on the property, and I had not planned to come back to Allenberry at that point. As a matter of fact, I interviewed in New York. I was thinking about California. I mean, thinking of all kinds of. I wasn't ready really to come back to Central Pennsylvania, but because of this need, I did come back, and been there ever since.
So you had to jump right in, but your father was still sort of heading things up? Or?
Well, I really did jump right in. I was 29 years old, and I really took over the business very quickly because Dad he was an entrepreneur, he was a politician, he started a motel chain. He built a motel that's over here on Carlisle Pike. It used to be called Friendly Inn. It's now I'm not sure what it is. It's a chain now. He also ran for Congress unfortunately, against Bill Goodling, who won the seat, his father's seat, George's seat, and so he was still involved in a lot of catering. Did a lot of catering at the Zembo Shrine in Harrisburg and other places, and so there was a void in management at Allenberry that I stepped into very quickly, and that was in 1965. I started on the payroll January 1st, 1965.
Now, the catering business, was that run from the kitchens at Allenberry, or
Yes.
they had separate?
Yes, it was.
Okay. And from what you've been mentioning, there was a lot of connection to West Shore, sort of in that direction, rather than Carlisle.
In the early years, there was a tremendous emphasis on Carlisle with the Carlisle because we operated the Carlisle Inn. We moved out of the Carlisle Inn, but we continued to operate the dairy store. And we did a lot of local catering. Ernie Coder lived in Carlisle, and he was a caterer, and we catered to a lot of church basements and YMCA's and so forth and so on. We would do caterings for 25 cents a head for hot dogs and ice cream and stuff like that. I mean,
What was the name of the business, the catering business?
Heinze Fine Foods. Heinze Fine Foods and Allenberry and the Yellow Breeches. But we got away from that, and
Would that have been about the time that Ernie passed away?
Yes. Yeah, he passed away in 1964. We were married in September of 1964, and that would have been the time that he passed away while my father was on that trip. So when I came back, I had worked with Ernie, of course, as a young man, and I knew he and his family really well. They were very, very close to our family, and but Ernie was a very important cog in and that's where I stepped in, yeah. But I also stepped in to the theater operation, which Ernie never had anything to do with. I became producer of the theater. When we incorporated the business in 1967, I became the first president of the company. And so I've been at it a long time.
How about your siblings? Were they involved also in any of the...
Kathy and I have two daughters.
No, your brothers and sisters.
Oh, well, siblings. Oh, sorry. Jerry went to Drexel and was interested in the hotel business. And after he graduated from Drexel, went to New York, worked in New York, worked at the Plaza Hotel, and came to Allenberry, I think in about, in the 70s. Jane was always kind of involved more as a personality, she was very involved with the theater, introducing the shows. She did some work in the dining rooms as a hostess and that sort of thing. Her husband was an attorney, and she had 3 children. And of course, Jerry has been there, for some time as acting as manager and in charge of the business. And now his son is also with us, Charles. We've had actually 5 generations of Heinzes that have worked at Allenberry, and still do. Our 2 daughters, are not really directly related to the business. My oldest daughter, Juliet Cricket Heinze, lives in Brooklyn, New York, and is involved in education, works for the city and the education department of the city. And my other daughter, Jackie, is a writer and writes the murder mystery for Allenberry every year, and an original Christmas show each year. And she's been doing that for 8 or 9 years now. She just got her master's degree in creative writing in California at Antioch College. Has a son just about to be 5 years old, and my grandson in Brooklyn, Owen, is 3 years old. Will be 3 years old next week. George will be 5 years old in October.
Okay, well now let's get back a little more to the development of Allenberry. When did the fishing become part of that? Something that you brought in as you took over?
The fly fishing, I can't tell you when that started. We own most of the property on both sides of the creek, from Boiling Springs down through the Allenberry property. We own 13 acres of land on the other side of the stream. So it was rather, it made it easy for the state to designate that area a fly fishing area, because it had to deal with so few landowners. And we were happy to have it a fly fishing area, because it attracted sports fishermen rather than fishermen that are just looking to catch a whole lot of fish. And but I did go through a period of time after I came back in the 60s where the state tried to change the area from a fly fishing only to spinners and things of that nature. I remember being very involved in an activity with the fly fishermen associations and fly fishermen organizations to try to maintain that as a fly fishing area. There was a lot of political flack about it, but we were able to maintain the culture of that stream as a fish for fun area. We were a catch and release, which it still is.
Well, it seems like a lovely spot to go fishing.
Yes, yes.
And to do a lot of other things too.
Oh, yes.
How about any maybe bad experiences with flooding or big storms? Is that?
Yes, we've had some experiences with flooding. Here again, the dates are going to escape me, but I guess it was in the 70s that we had Agnes, and that wiped out our tennis courts. That was the biggest loss we had. It wiped out the tennis courts. Most of the buildings are above the flood area. We did have some flooding in the Still House, which was the original limestone building that was built in 1785, right on the creek, because it used the water in the creek, to distill whiskey. So we did get some flooding in that building, but very little. But a lot of damage to our meadow pavilion and storage areas down there and in that area, and course, the rebuilding the tennis courts. Then there have been subsequent flooding, but not so much damage. Very fortunate not to have very little damage, because that meadow area really absorbs a great deal of water. You can have the Yellow Breeches runs right through there like a river, like a roaring river, and it survives very nicely. Yeah.
I think I am understanding from what you said that maybe you were drawn particularly to the theater part of the works.
Well, I was never what you call a food man. My brother was much more involved in food service and food preparation and so forth, as is my nephew Charles. I was more into the business end of the entire business, and of course the theater, and working with the theater. The theater's unique. I mean, it's a unique kind of profession, and it draws a very interesting type of person. People that are creative and talented and sensitive and so forth. And we've made, Kathy and I have both made lifelong friends in the theater. They're just, they're a little different, and they're wonderful people. The creativity and the talent. And I have an artistic director now, Ryan Gibbs, who's been associated with Allenberry since the early part of this century, and he's now my artistic director, and he brings wonderful companies in. Just last year, he brought his own management staff in, and really we had our annual Charles A.B. Heinze Memorial Cancer Benefit last night at Allenberry, and it was the opening of South Pacific, and wonderful production. I don't know if this message that I'm having is going to have any impact on the immediate period that we're talking about, but it's a great show, great Rogers, one of Rogers and Hammerstein's probably three greatest works, and we did one of them last year, Oklahoma, and the other one is on Broadway now, and that's Anna. What is it? King and I. The King and I. Anna and the King of Siam. The King and I. Yeah. Those three works are probably three of the greatest musicals in the history of American theater. So anybody that hasn't seen it lately should come and see it. There's a little pitch.
Yeah, that probably, I don't know that it will get out there in time to
Probably
affect it,
not,
but you never know.
Sorry you
just
missed
when
it,
you're-
folks.
Well, now, Ann Hoffer's told me about wonderful parties that they were part of in the 60s. Was there a regular, like, Saturday night crowd or anything like that developed with the bar and restaurant, or?
Well, one of the social aspects of our Allenberry Club was the tennis activity in the tennis courts.
Well, now, when you say club, are you talking about a membership thing?
Yeah,
that
we have
people
a membership club, the Allenberry Club. It started with the swimming pool back in 1957 or 58 when they built. My father built the swimming pool. This is when I was in the service. I wasn't around at the time, but back in those days, you couldn't party on Sunday because of the Pennsylvania Blue laws. You had to be a private club. So when he opened the swimming pool, he made it a private club, and members could come and swim and socialize with cocktails and so forth on Sunday, as a member of the club. And when Kathy and I came back to Allenberry in 1965, one of the first things a lot of the club members asked us to do, because Kathy was very athletic, was to build tennis courts. So we built tennis courts shortly after our arrival, and that broadened the interest for the club to tennis. And that developed into a very, very social atmosphere, because you had men's tennis on Monday night, and the guys would all come up to the bar after tennis. And then you had couples night, mixed what they call mixed doubles, and those groups would come up to the carriage room after tennis and socialize. So there were those types of weekly activities. Then there were monthly club functions, of course, and now we have entertainment at the bar. We don't have the carriage room open anymore on a daily basis, so we've moved the carriage room bar, replica of the carriage room bar, into the breeches in Fairfield Hall, and we have entertainment on Thursdays and Fridays. And Friday is pretty much a regular night for a lot of our regular customers that get
But
together.
is the club still in existence, or?
Yes, it is.
Oh.
Oh, yeah.
And who would be typical members of this? Are they young professionals, or?
No, families. It's a family-oriented club, because you can bring the kids, to the swimming pool, and they get involved in tennis. We've had some outstanding high school tennis players that belong to the Allenberry Club because their families did. And I have not been so active because I had some knee problems and so forth, so I haven't played tennis for a very, very long time. But there's quite a lot of activity, and we have a tennis pro that gives lessons and clinics and so forth. Then we got the old timers tennis. And they play about 3 times a week, and come up to the bar and socialize. It's not quite the way it used to be at the carriage room bar. It used to be 3 deep at that carriage room bar. We used to get 30 guys up there, 30 guys or more, and sing songs and play liar's poker.
And these would have been regulars coming in from the area, not
Yeah,
the casual guests that
no,
came.
These are both Carlisle and West Shore. Yeah. We had hard true tennis courts. I think we had hard true tennis courts before anybody, with the exception of maybe Harrisburg Country Club. Now they're much more common. Most of the clubs have the hard true clay courts, but ours are still very well maintained and used. Yeah.
Well, now, I don't want to wear you out, but how about the famous sticky buns? What was the genesis of?
Well, that all started. My dad was very active in the Pennsylvania Restaurant Association, having served as president, and he loved association work. He was one of the few people that was. He was not only president of the Pennsylvania Hotel Association and Restaurant Association, both, but he was also on the national boards of both organizations, the American Hotel Association and the National Restaurant Association. So he was always involved in association work, and that led him to be a judge in the cherry pie baking contest in the state of Pennsylvania. And he hired...
Now, is this part of the farm show thing, or something separate from that?
Yeah, I think it probably did take part as part of the farm show. I'm not really sure. That was years and years ago. Now my name problem is going to... Nina Gutschall was a wonderful, wonderful young pie baker. And she became the state champion. And he hired her, and she came to Allenberry and baked the most wonderful pies. And that's when the sticky buns started. And we don't bake pies anymore. We actually baked pies and sold them to restaurants in Carlisle. We had a little van that with pie racks in it, and I can remember as a young driver throwing pies all over that van, delivering them to restaurants in Carlisle. I was not a good pie truck driver. I used to get the best smells when they would all land in the step area of the truck, the van. But anyway, what has survived from our baking history that Nina started were the sticky buns. So they've been at it. We've been at that for a long, long, long time.
It's such a signature part of the dining experience there.
Yeah.
Well, now I understand that Allenberry is now on the market. That must have been quite a hard decision.
Yeah, I tried to get away from the business for a couple of years, and we had a wonderful plan, and things were going really, really well in the early years of the 21st century. In 2006, we got approval for a development project in land adjacent to Allenberry. It's about 60 acres of land right on the Yellow Breeches Creek, beautiful land. And we got an over 55 development approved, and it was one of the earlier developments of that kind in Pennsylvania. They had some around the Philadelphia area that we went down and visited, and very popular concept. But before we could really get going, and we had all kinds of competition. We had three national companies really involved in bidding on this thing, and land values were very high at that time, back in 2006 and 7. And we got a very generous sales agreement with Cavanian, a national company, and had a great plan to build 126 units and tie them into Allenberry with a cart path system. They loved the whole concept of Allenberry with entertainment and facilities and swimming pool and tennis courts and the whole thing. A tremendous concept, which is, just I feel as valuable today as it was then. But when the housing recession started, which really was international in scope, that back in 07 and 08, the national companies just shut down in central Pennsylvania. Shut down all their projects. Cavanian had 5 projects in central Pennsylvania. They were really developing an important presence here, and they sold everything. And of course, the Allenberry project was the newest of them that hadn't been started, hadn't completed the sale, and so our timing was just maybe months from being a whole different concept. So after that, of course, business struggled because of the state of the economy. Theater was changing somewhat because we weren't getting the number of buses from Maryland and Virginia and Washington and Baltimore that we had been getting, because the culture was changing. Older people like myself were driving sports cars rather than getting on bus trips. And so we lost a great deal of business through that. We knew that running a professional theater 400-seat theater in the middle of the country, in the middle of central Pennsylvania, eight performances a week could not exist on local traffic. We knew that from the get-go. We had to depend on bringing people into the area. So the theater really has a great product. I wish people would appreciate theater a little bit more, but we don't have the population base and the market base in central Pennsylvania that you have in the major cities that can be more successful with dinner theater and that sort of thing. So we got together and decided that rather than at our age, I mean, I just turned 80 years old a couple of weeks ago, and my brother is in his 70s and has some health issues. To start all over again and go in a new direction with trying to rebuild the image of Allenberry into more of a boutique operation with a first-class food service, which I think is the potential for the property, and have the theater operate independently as a nonprofit, which we tried to turn it into several years ago. We couldn't make it work, but a nonprofit could come in at the beginning of a new ownership and be very successful. And of course, there should be some investment in the property. And so after a lot of gnashing of teeth, we decided, I kind of led the family into the direction that it's better to bring new owners in and try to continue developing the potential of that property. And we tried to market the property on the QT for the last several years, actually. So it's not a recent decision to put the company on the market. We were actually looking for investors. We started off looking for investors because certain members of the family would like to stay involved. But that didn't work. So now we turned it over to NAICIR, and they are blowing it open, and they're developing a lot of interest in the property. Yeah, we'll be showing people the property today. I've showed it to others very recently. So there's a lot of interest right now, and I feel very strongly that that's the way to go. We've had our 70-year run. And,
would you retain part of the property for personal use?
Actually, my wife and I built a home on the property that is part of the development property, and we have subdivided that and do own that outright. So we're planning to stay, and we also have an apartment up in State College that I enjoy very much. We're part of that community too, and we're not retired up there. My wife doesn't spend nearly as much time up there as I do, but I really enjoy going up there and spending some time getting away. We're not beach people. We do like going skiing. We thought about a ski location, but we didn't want to live full time in a ski area. So we're fortunate to have wonderful, wonderful friends that have beautiful homes out west, and we visit them and still ski after a new knee, a new hip, and I'm back on the ski slopes this last year.
All right, so
Yeah.
Life is good.
Yeah, I'm even thinking about going back into tennis.
Well, if there's nothing else that you want to add right now, I guess we'll come to close.
No, I think you have most of the information. I mean, there's a lot of history in the theater. You know, my claim to fame was that I signed John Travolta's initial membership, equity membership contract when he was 17 years old. He came and did a summer season at Allenberry, and he went directly to Broadway from Allenberry. People don't think of John Travolta as being a Broadway star, but at the age of 17, he was on Broadway in a show about the Andrews sisters during the war, and he played a Jerry. It was called Over There, and he played a Jerry Lewis type character, young soldier, entertainer, and of course went on to fame as a television star and then eventually a movie star. And that's just one. I mean, we've had a number of representatives in the entertainment industry that have brought a lot of pride to Allenberry Playhouse. Like I said the other day in an interview, we've had everybody from John Travolta at 17 to Shirley Jones at 60 perform on the Allenberry stage.
Well, I'm sure they remember the Allenberry location and ambiance in a very special way because it is so unique.
The other thing, in my brief presentation last night at the cancer benefit, I mentioned that so many of our actors, performers, staff members at the theater have met and married. I can't count the ones. And my artistic director, standing right beside me on the stage, met and married his wife Amy at Allenberry. So it has a special atmosphere, and I think the word we use most often used by people that have worked there or still work there is that it's magical. It really is.
It is. Well, thank you very much for sharing your memories.
Yeah, thank you for allowing me to.